Welcome to our session on resume writing for young professionals. Resume writing is something I started doing when I was 20. I was hired as a student employment officer for Service Canada, and my job was helping young people find jobs. And part of that, of course, was teaching people how to do resumes. So it's something I've got lots of experience with, more than 20 years now experience doing that. And it's something I love. It's creative, it's interesting, it's a way to present yourself to somebody that's that reflects who you are. So I'm excited to be talking to you about this tonight. Tonight's agenda really is about, first of all, getting yourself organized, and then next, working through a master resume, looking at what application tracking systems are, because a lot of times you don't need a traditional resume because you're going to be applying into an applicant tracking system. So I want you to understand what that is so that you don't waste a lot of time making this beautiful, wonderful resume that's got bold and italics and colors and all these wonderful things, only to find out that you're just going to be dragging and dropping into an applicant tracking system. And then we'll look at targeted resumes. And then lastly, creating interest with all those things I just said you don't need for an applicant tracking system. If there isn't an applicant tracking system, then you absolutely do need to stand out from the crowd. So that's what we're going to be working on tonight. So the first thing you want to do when you're starting to do a job search and get your resumes out the door is you want to get organized. And it sounds really boring, and it is a little bit, but you want to make sure that when you want to find a resume, you know exactly where it is. So in this case, I've got my resumes under my PC, my C drive, Sarah, so I know exactly who it is, and my resumes. So a really simple filing system so I know exactly where to go. They're not saved on my desktop, they're not hidden in a file that's knee deep in university papers and things like that. And then from there, I've got my three master resumes, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute. And then I've organized my file folders so that I know exactly where things are. If I applied overseas, it's in this file folder, and then in sub file folders, my UN jobs are in this folder, and then important documents. So you may be asked for your degree. So I always scan my important documents and make sure that they're in my file folders. So I can, if I need to, I can quickly prove to somebody I have that degree. So having yourself organized and making sure that you've got a good filing system set up is critical to your job search. I usually recommend that you set up file folders for every company that you're applying into or every field that you're applying into, just so that you can keep it straight in your mind where you filed what resume. And once you've got a good filing system, you'll find everything else runs a lot more smoothly once you've got that in place. So the next thing you want to get organized is a master resume. And a master resume is a resume that has all of your information on it, and it's not a resume that you ever send out to anyone because it's way too long. So my master resume is 5 pages, and probably if I updated it, it would be a little bit longer. Um, and what it does is it just lists by category all the different things that you've done. So you've got your address information, emails, websites, LinkedIn, obviously, nationality, and a photo, because some countries require you to provide a photo, some types of industries require you to provide a photo. So having it all contained in one spot is a good idea. In Canada, we never use photos unless you're going to work in the hospitality industry, and even then it's unusual. But if you were to apply overseas, very usual. So we've got an employment summary, so just all the jobs that you've ever held. Then you've got your education, because that never changes. If you had certifications, you'd have those there as well. And then I have my experience listed by categories, because what I want to do is I want to create a library or an inventory of all my experiences. And because I work in HR, then I have all my experiences related to those topics, so I can pull from them whenever I want. So I've got recruiting, and then I've organized it by where. So at National Defense with the town of Arnprior, employee and labor relations, got organizational behavior and organizational design, training and development, compensation and benefits administration, and then my continuous education. and all the courses that I've taken, and then any kind of community involvement and published works, which some of you might also have. And I also do guest speaking. Interests are not normal in Canada again, but if you were to apply overseas, that is something that they're interested in seeing. They want to know that they're getting a candidate who has a diverse interest group, interest base. I sort of think it's because they have so many holidays in Europe that it's like, well, if we hire you, are you going to be bored every time we're off work? So they want to know you actually have a life beyond work. So getting a master resume together, getting it organized, I think the best way to organize it is by your types of experience. So for you, you might have international development, you might have project management, you might have research and development, monitoring and evaluation. So whatever your headings are going to be, you start to think through your experience based on those headings and then group them together. And like I said, you'll never use it. I never send this resume anywhere, but what I'm able to do is I'm able to cut and paste from it and pull from it so that I'm always able to create a resume that's targeted, but without having to constantly recreate content. So hopefully that will give you an idea about how to create a master resume. So applicant tracking systems are the new normal for recruiting. Recruiters are getting more and more applicants. They're getting more and more applicants from outside of Canada, or if you're applying overseas, they're getting those kind of overseas applications, and they need a way to sort the applications. And so what happens with the applicant tracking system is that the manager who's hiring goes to the recruiter in the company and says, this is the job that I'm hiring for. These are the qualifications that I want. Now I want you to find that person. So the recruiter goes into their applicant tracking system and inputs all that data in with a series of keywords that they're looking for. And then when they post that job advertisement, they then screen all the applicants against this internal system, and only the resumes that, or the applications that meet these criteria, screen through. So as an example, the public service has a public service resourcing system, and that's its sole purpose, is to try and screen the volume of applicants against a set of criteria that the managers put in place. And in the public service, we're very transparent about that. We let you know that these are the criteria. It's in the job poster. Where in the private sector, it's less clear. So there might be keywords that you're not realizing are that important, that are contained in the applicant scanning system. So what I wanted to do was show you a really great website called JobScan that helps you, because it's basically an applicant tracking system, but instead of the recruiter looking at the end result, you're able to look at the end result. So what I've done is I've gone to LinkedIn and found a job that we'll see if I'm qualified for. So it's a learning and talent development specialist in Winnipeg. Imagine the mosquitoes are quite ripe right now there. And then what I've done is I've taken a resume, which is a training and development specialist resume. So I use my master resume, and I have one that's just for training and development. And I've basically just gone Control A, captured all the information, done the same thing on the job advertisement, captured all the information, and then in JobScan, what happens is you see this front-facing page, but then if you scroll all the way down, you'll see that you can try a sample resume and job. So I've uploaded the resume, or I've just cut and pasted because I don't want to upload something onto a system. And then I've pasted the job description. And now I'm going to scan it. So scanning takes a little bit of time, but then it tells me that my match rate is only 32%. And I'm going to end my tour. So I've only got 32% chance that that resume is going to match up. So it says that my resume is a little bit long. It's 312 words, and unless I was applying to an executive level or government position, 750 words would be better. I've got degrees. I don't have measurable results. My job titles don't match. I don't have any of the companies that match up. So training, their job description says training 6 times. My resume says 12. talent development, they say 5 times, but my resume doesn't say talent development at all. So design, I'm pretty close on. I've got 3 in mine and they have 4 in theirs. Instructional design, I don't mention. Project management, I don't mention. Learning solutions, I do. And then performance management, I mentioned twice and they mention it once. And then the soft skills, so collaborate, influence, project management, none of these things are showing up on my resume. So if I was to go back and do it again and use different keywords, you can see development, 6 in the job description, 3 in the resume, then what I can do is I can start to game the system because now I can see what's missing. So if I go back and make sure that I have job titles that are similar, my percentage rate is going to go way up. So I really like this system because it gives you a tangible way to look at, am I matching up well in an applicant tracking system? Because you might think in your mind, oh, I did a really good job on that resume. This is going to be really great for that job. And it turns out, you know what? It's not that great. It has great keywords for another job, but for the particular job that you're applying for, it's not going to screen well against an applicant tracking system. In my mind, this site is worth its weight in gold because the more you know about your resume and how that looks to a computer, the more likely you are to be successful using a resume with an applicant tracking system. All right, so here we are in an actual applicant tracking system, and this is the Public Service Resourcing System. So there's a job posting for a Human Resources Advisor, developmental. It's with Veterans Affairs. It's in Winnipeg or Kirkland Lake or Charlottetown or Montreal. So we're going to attempt to apply online, and I'm already logged into this system because here's my applicant number here. So it tells me this is the job I'm applying for, this is the reference number, the organization, and everything I say has to be true and could be verified, and anything that's fraudulent can result in me not being hired, rejecting my application, revoking the job offer if I've already been hired. And then I have to confirm that I understand that that's what's going to happen. So I'll confirm that that's what's going to happen. And then you get this really long list of requirements. So here's the Human Resources Developmental Advisor position, and it wants me to put in a resume, which we would drop in. And you can see that with the resume, you just simply cut and paste. 32,000 characters. Honestly, you'll never ever get there. You really should never get there. That's way too long of a resume. And it also tells you that it disconnects after 60 minutes, which is important if you're applying the public service, because sometimes if you, for some bizarre reason, were to type your resume into here, you would definitely lose your resume. So then you would save that and it would show a green. Let's just see, I'll put some sort of content in here. I want to make sure I don't actually apply for this job, but we'll put some content into it just so you can see how the boxes change. All right, so we'll drop some content into it and say save. And now you can see that it's showing that I put in a resume. And the next thing you've got is screening questions. So it tells you the same warning, it'll disconnect. So do you have experience as a member of the Canadian Armed Forces? If you say yes, then you have to fill in this box. Do you have experience working in an HR discipline? If you say yes, then you have to fill in this box. And you have to provide clearly demonstrate where and when you did to obtain that experience. So then you've got training and development, more training stuff, providing advice and classification. And so you've got to fill in all of these boxes, either yes or no. And depending on whether you choose yes or no, you'll get screened in or screened out. So it's a lot of work using applicant tracking systems, but you can see where if you had organized your resume based on themes like project management, policies, it would be a lot easier to fill these in than trying to pull specific examples out of your experience. Using spreadsheets, so computer would be a good thing to have a heading for in your master resume. So that's what an applicant tracking system looks like. And if you don't fill it out, if we go back, this system is really good in terms of it lets you know what you're missing. And then once you've got everything, you would submit your application. Education, it tells you need a college or bachelor's degree. This one tells them what I already have. Since I already have those degrees, it's already preloaded for me, so I can save that. And now my education is loaded because it pulled it from my file. Employment tenure is just, are you willing to work permanently full-time? Yep. Now it's green. Where am I willing to work? Oh, I would so not be willing to work in Winnipeg. We'll pretend I'd be willing to work in Kirkland Lake and save. And now that's going to be green. So you just want to make sure that everything's green, and then you'll be able to submit your application. But that's what an applicant tracking system looks like internally. And you're going to come up against a lot of these applicant tracking systems where they're not asking necessarily for a resume. They're asking you to fill in boxes. So it's really important that you have your information organized and structured in a way that it's easy just to drag and drop information into these systems. When you're looking at a targeted resume, the first thing you want to do is you want to determine, do you know anyone at that company who could help you out? So let's look at what that might look like. So let's imagine that I find this job, the Director of Teaching and Learning at Seneca College. So I look at that, and one of the first things that it tells me when I'm looking at the job poster is, does anybody I know work there? And it turns out Danielle works there. Danielle is a former QSO volunteer. She was working in Guyana when I was working in Grenada. So I know Danielle pretty well. And I can, here in LinkedIn, I can ask for a referral. So on LinkedIn, it's really simple to figure out if you know somebody. And asking for a referral is important because for large companies, recruiting is very, very expensive. Going through lots of resumes is time consuming. It takes a lot of effort. So when people are referred, there's a much higher likelihood that you're going to get a job interview, because if Danielle is somebody that the college values, which I would imagine they do because she's lovely, then they will see that, oh, well, if Danielle's a good employee and she's saying that Sarah would be a good employee, we should probably look at Sarah. So being referred or talking to somebody in the company who can refer you to a position is really important. The other thing is it's a win-win for the organization. So let's say Danielle refers me and I was to be successful. Oftentimes companies will have a policy where the person who referred would get a monetary bonus because it saves them time and it saves them money, so they give their employees bonuses for referring really good candidates. What it also does is it stops them from referring candidates who wouldn't be very good. So, you know, if Danielle referred me and I started and I was an absolute disaster, they would be like, we don't trust Danielle as much as we used to. So first thing you want to do is find out if you know somebody who's in that company. Either ask for the referral on LinkedIn, or just get in touch with them privately and ask them a little bit about the company. The next thing you'd want to do is you want to research the company. So there's lots of ways you can research the company. If you're following them on LinkedIn, you can go and look at what's been going on lately. You can do a Google News search on that company. You can talk to employees of the company, but you want to get a sense of what's going on in that, not only industry, which you've probably hopefully done some research on already, but you want to know what's going on with that company. And nowadays there's so many ways to get to know what's going on in the company, but Google News is really great. LinkedIn is definitely excellent for the news they want you to see. And then you can do a Google Alerts and just have information that comes up about that company come into your email box every day, just so you are always constantly abreast of what's currently going on. So the next thing you're going to do is you're going to use what's called a word cloud to capture all the information that's in the job description or the advertisement. So this is the same advertisement for Director of Teacher and Learning. And you can see there's a lot of detail in this job poster, which I mean, if you go through it line by line, you're certainly going to get the qualifications, but that's a lot to read and take in, and it's a lot for you to sort of process in terms of what is it that they're looking for. So what I've done is I've taken all the information that's contained in this job poster and I've put it into what's called a word cloud. So now, instead of looking at it line by line, now I can see an overall thematic view of the words that are there most frequently. So I can see leadership development is there a lot, teaching, learning, academic, innovative, research, scholarly, are all kinds of the words that they're looking for: professional, plan, support, practices, projects. All of those are words that I want to be using in my resume because I know that those are words that are in the job poster. And one of the things that you can do with this word cloud is you can go in and you can look at the word list. So it tells me, so not only do I visually see it, but it tells me I see academic 12 times, learning 10, development 9, leadership 8, SOLT 8 times, teaching, innovative 6, learning 6, teaching 6. So, and notice that, so we had teaching 7 and teaching 6, and the difference is the capital. So one of the things you got to be careful about when you're looking at these word clouds is the same word coming up over and over again, but it's just got a capital and doesn't have a capital. So same thing with learning. Learning is 6, learning is 10, just capital, non-capital. So learning is quite an important word to have in your resume in this case. So that should help you to come up with some really good ideas about the things you want to focus on when you use a word cloud when you're trying to develop your resume, because sometimes it's not there's just so much in a job poster that it becomes challenging to try and figure out what you should be focusing your attention on. This lets you get a real quick visual of what you should be focusing your attention on. Another handy tool for your resume is not just looking at what the job application wanted in terms of word cloud, but analyzing the text that's already in your resume. So this is a word counter and text analyzer. It's kind of ugly looking in terms of how it presents the information, but it's still really important to look at your resume analytically, because we tend to believe that we wrote it really well and we didn't use a lot of repetition, but the reality can be that we do repeat phrases because we're used to writing that way. So this will let you know if you repeat any phrases frequently and if it's a problem. So here's all the text that I entered, which we already knew. So number of words, 1,300. Average length of words, 6. Number of sentences. Number of commas per sentence, lots of commas, but that's okay in a resume. We actually want that. Words repeated consecutively in more than one place. So April, Arnprior is where I work, so month, and that would all be acceptable because P is going to be for page, the number of pages in the resume. So here's word sequences that occurs in more than one place. So services, the Ministry of, which would make sense. Canada School of Public Service is a education provider, so that makes sense. The learning, the Caribbean, all those things are going to be the correct way to say something. So 7 times we see for the, so that might be a problem. I might want to try and reframe how I'm saying something if I keep saying for the. Maybe there's a different way to say that without having that kind of repetition. And same here, 7 of the. So that would be somewhere where I'd want to go back and look at and see how can I reword that. 6, Department of, well, you can only, it is the Department of National Defense, so that would make sense, and I wouldn't want to go in and change that because that is correct. Just gonna see if there's anything else that sort of stands out. No, that's correct, collaboratively written. So now it tells me how many times I have a word and then how many times it begins a sentence, which is important when you're doing resume writing because you don't want the same word starting the sentence more than once. So here I've got it at the beginning of the sentence once there. So what we're really looking for is more than once. So here's twice. And I'm thinking AS is going to be here, assistance, assist. That's probably what is going on with that. So once built. And what we'd sometimes see is, I don't think we're going to see it in my resume just because God willing, I do a good job of my own work. So insured is twice, which isn't too bad. Probably would be better if it was only started at once. But oftentimes what I'll see when I'm editing in resumes is responsible for, provided, like very similar verbs all the time. So using a verb like verb one online will help you get different verbs, and that's something I use, so you can kind of see that that's what's happening because we've got these really long list of words and not a lot of repetition at all in terms of starting sentences. So I think that's a really handy tool to do a quick sort of analytical search on your resume to make sure you're not making some of those common mistakes about beginning sentences. Ending sentences I'm not so concerned about, and then the total number of times a word shows up in your resume is also important. That shows up 18 times, not a problem at all. So you have to make decisions about what's important and what's not, but it's definitely a handy tool when you're starting out to start checking your work on your resume for the first few times you do it. And once you get into the flow of writing a resume, you'll find that that repetition comes down an awful lot. The last thing you want to do is look at the color and style of the company that you're applying to. So some companies are very playful and some are more conservative. So you want your resume to mirror back to them what their corporate culture is, and to have a sense of familiarity. So let's look at a couple of different ways you can do that. Here's Seneca's website. So Seneca, you can see that their primary color is red. They use a stylized font here that's slightly serif, not a strong serif. It's stylized A. So it wouldn't be too terribly hard to find a font that was very similar to that in Word. So I'd be looking for the similar type of A, and it's nice because my name is Sarah, right? So I'd have the S and the A looking very similar in my resume. But then they use just a regular, it almost looks like an Arial font for the rest of their headings. So that's what I would do, is I'd use this, this stylized red for my name, and then I'd use this type of font for the rest of my resume. The other thing I would do is I see that this is a very basic website. It's not got a lot. I mean, it's got a slider that's going across, but it's not very busy. It's very clean. It's very neat. It's very organized. So I would want to apply the same kind of principles to my resume. I wouldn't want it to have a lot going on just because this website doesn't have a lot going on. But let's look at a different college in Toronto just to get a comparison between the two schools and to see the difference and what you might do differently on a resume between Seneca College and, let's say, George Brown College. So here's George Brown's college website. So now you can see that their key is blue and white, and theirs is all in uppercase. So notice George Brown College all uppercase, Continuous Learning uppercase, all of it's uppercase. So they definitely used a serif font, when the serif is just sort of the little ticks that happen at the N and down at the R. So those are serifs. But then you can see sans serif, no little ticks in the lettering. Sans serif for the rest of their headings, but all uppercase again. All uppercase here. So I would do the same thing in my resume. I would have a serif font and then all capitals for my headers. And they use a lot of color, and they got a lot going on. And it looks like this is very important to them, right? And it also is kind of reminiscent of the pride flag as well. So I think that there's a notion, especially in downtown Toronto, which is where George Brown is, that they want to be an inclusive kind of campus, and their menus speak to that. So when I'm doing my resume, I'd be very cognizant of the fact that this is something that's important to them, and to reflect it back in my resume somehow with my color scheme. So maybe what I would do is I would create a border that was in this style. So I wouldn't necessarily have all my headers be all these different colors because that would be maybe a bit too much. But I might just take a snippet of this and to do a snippet. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that tool, but it's just a little clipping tool. So you can do a snippet, and I would do a new snip, and I would just sort of take this much, like that, and it went too far, but I could sort of take a little snip of it and take that color scheme and then make a border of it out of it, and that would probably look really nice for the college. So it's all about being creative, mirroring back to them what's important to them. I also noticed that they use a lot of squares. So sometimes you'll see these icons as circles instead of squares. So I'd want my resume to be very square. You know, I would be using, I would full justify all my text so that everything's running straight on the left and the right sides. And I would definitely be, again, Georgia Brown is a bit more of a creative campus, but I would definitely be more creative about how I created my resume in a style-wise in order to match Georgia Brown, where Seneca was a much more plain, simple, conservative style that you want to do for a resume. All right, so this is what a resume for Seneca College might look like using and reflecting back to them some of their style elements. So you've got the red font with a very similar font. It's got the S with the serif and the sort of fat A, and then you've got upper lowercase Arial or sans serif type text for the headers, but not a lot, like definitely not a lot going on in terms of too much, just very, very subtle, not justified here. So we've got some movement and flow to the text. So that's what the one for Seneca might look like if you were doing that. And I'd probably even change these hyperlinks to be red instead of a blue, just to keep it really, really simple with not a lot of colors. But if you were going to do one for Georgia Brown, here you can see what I did was I did that snippet better and I was able to make it really, really narrow, and there's just the band. Now instead of going north and south, it's going east and west. So it's reflecting back, but it's not in your face screaming, look, I copied you, aren't I clever? It's just very subtle. And then you've got a real boxiness to the resume. So everything's fully justified. So it really looks a lot like their website with that squareness to their to the elements in the resume, and reflecting back some of their stylized elements. So that's sort of how you would tailor your resume to reflect back to them their style. So now for the don'ts. One of the things you don't want to do is assume that because the job title is the same, you can use an old resume. So when I showed you the job scan where we took a job that was in Winnipeg and then I just dumped a resume into it, and you saw that my match was only 35%. So even though I'm a training development specialist, and even though I more than likely qualify very well for that job, just taking an old resume and plunking it against a new job opportunity is not going to get you screened through an application process. So make sure that every time you're applying for a job, you use a new resume. You know, if you've got that master resume, it's not hard. You're just bringing elements over from that resume into the new resume. But hopefully you saw that using JobScan, it doesn't work. When I apply for a job and I do that exercise, my jobs, when I look at the percentage, are always somewhere above 95%. So 35%, definitely not. You're aiming for above 80, and the closer to 100 you get, the more successful you're going to be. So the next don't is don't delay in applying for positions. this position, Director of Teaching and Learning, was posted 3 weeks ago. That's a long time ago. And you can see that there's 1,028 views of this position, which I'd say usually about 10% of people are going to apply through. Just depends, who's looking at and what type of qualifications they have. So, sometimes people look who have no, would never qualify. But generally speaking, most posts should be up and down within a week, and some of them come down up and down even faster than that. So when I was looking at a position came up in the Caribbean, working back in Grenada, but working from Bahamas, and I was like, oh my God, this is the perfect position for me. And I was like, oh, okay, see it. It had gone up that day, and I was like, I'm gonna wait, get my resume perfect, because I didn't have time. I was doing something, and I was like, oh, I'll apply tomorrow. It won't be a big deal. It just came up that day, and I saved it, thank goodness. So when you save a job, you'll then be able to go into your jobs folder, and it will be sitting there somewhere. She said, hopefully, save jobs. There it is, sitting there. So when it's saved, even if they pull the position down, you'll still be able to look at the position, even if it's not currently up there. So I'd saved this position that I was really interested in. The next day I went back, gone. I was like, what happened? And so I was, because I had saved it, I had the recruiter's name. And so I sent the recruiter a message, and I'll show you. Here's our messaging in LinkedIn. So I emailed Katie, and I was like, this position, this team leader, Eastern Caribbean Skills for Growth, really interested in it. What happened? And so it took her about a week to get back to me, and then she said, yeah, you know what, send me your resume. And from there, we went on. I did an interview. But based on a lot of stuff that's been going on in the UK and the US, as I'm sure you can imagine, the position got put on hold. But Katie and I now have a great relationship, because she's a phenomenal young woman with a really promising future, and I like picking up those people and keeping them, because I really think women should help women as much as they possibly can, because the world's big enough for all of us to be successful. So really important to apply early, because you never know how long these jobs are going to be posted. Because if you're a recruiter and you get, in the first day you get 10 amazing candidates, why would you hold it open for 10 days when all you're going to get is, now maybe you're going to get 100 really great candidates, and now you have more work to do. So as soon as they get enough good candidates, they're going to shut down their process. So apply early. So the last thing is to not be afraid to reach out to recruiters. Recruiters are one of your best friends if you can make them your best friend. And I spend a lot of time trying to develop relationships with recruiters, because recruiters' fundamental purpose is to fill vacancies within an organization to the best of their ability. So if they've got a great candidate, but you're not the candidate for this particular job, they're going to keep your resume on file, and they're going to try and find you a spot somewhere, because it makes their life easier. If they've got 5 jobs that they're currently working on, and a 6th comes in and they've already got a candidate for it, well, there's one less thing for them to do. So what I'm going to show you next is where to find the recruiter's information on LinkedIn. So on this poster, we can see that the recruiter has their information already listed for me. So I can go in and I can look and see who Agnes Greer is, or I can send her an email if I had the premium features of LinkedIn. But usually recruiters have an open profile. So I can see more about her. We have one mutual connection. She's been the senior talent acquisition specialist for 8 months. And before that, she was with them for 3 years. And before that, she was with George Brown, Rogers. So it looks like she's been doing this since she got her certificate in human resource management in 2005. and she started working as a recruiter right out of there and went to York University and got her BA in sociology. So when I'm talking to somebody and I know those things, as an example, I went to York University for a week. Not exactly a spectacular academic career with York, but I that was my first choice university a long time ago. So we might have that in common. Although, yeah, she is much younger than I am. But trying to make those connections is helpful, and we already have a connection in common. However, with recruiters, the connections that you have in common aren't nearly as close, because you can see she's got over 500 connections. So just learning a little bit about the recruiters is important, and then you can connect with her if you wanted to, and let her know. So important to reach out to recruiters when the opportunity exists, because again, it just gives you that little bit of an advantage when you've submitted your resume. Last but not least, your resume really should be a reflection of who you are and what your style is. So if you're really relaxed, then your resume should be more relaxed. If you're more conservative, your resume should be more conservative. So I'm going to show you some resumes I've worked on. I've changed the names, obviously, just to show you how different you can get with resumes. Um, and then I'll show you how you can sort of try and find your own style. All right, so here's a resume that I did that's very simple, very clean, stylized coloring. The resume was actually for World Vision, and if you can remember World Vision, they have that square logo as their design element for their website and for all their promotional materials. So here you've got sort of a left-hand column for your headers instead of it being over top, and then you've got your skill sets, and then you go into experience. So that's one way to lay out resumes. Then this one is another way to lay out a resume where you've got all these social icons, because the job was for a communications publicist sort of position. So getting all that content in, and the blue circles were a nice contrast to the blue really squareness of it. Another one, let's see, sorry. So here's just a very simple resume, but with the headings justified on the right instead of the left, which makes it just a little bit different. So again, simple but different. This one was for, I changed the name obviously, but this one was for a lovely, lovely woman who honestly looked just like this. Like, she just happy and joyful and really, really lovely person to work with. And she had been working as a deli counter supervisor, but had gone to college and was just really feeling like, this isn't the life that I wanted, but I really want to do office admin. And so we did up her resume to reflect more the administrative stuff that she was doing. And I'm really happy to say she's now working as my chiropractor's office manager, because when my chiropractor had a vacancy, I was like, oh, I know the perfect person. And I think that's another reason why you want to, like, just going back to latching on to recruiters or people who work in HR is, if you're a good person, if you're somebody that's honest and genuine, people latch onto that and they want to help, or at least I know I always want to help. So resumes can be fun like this, and this resume really, really reflected who she was, and she loved it and I loved it, and it worked out really well for her. And then this one, again, changed the name, but this one having the address come down along the side, and again with the summary on the left-hand side, and with this border that sort of gives it a really elegant feel. So there's all kinds of different ways, you can present yourself that are authentic to you. And if you're having trouble coming up with ideas, I'm by no means the most creative person in the world, but what I'll do is I'll Google creative resumes, and it gives me ideas about how I'd want to do layout and how I'd want to do design. I think the one thing I would caution you about with something like this is, unless you're doing, graphic design, maybe, but oftentimes the colors are hard to print. So it looks great on a computer screen, but then when you try and print it, it doesn't come out nearly as well. infographics are really big. But the challenge is that there's not a lot of content there. So try to balance content with image. Um, I love these kind of ones where there's a stylized picture of the person, which is a lot easier to do nowadays. But you can see like there's all kinds of really neat ways to lay out resumes. And I don't usually go, you can sort of see what I do. I don't usually go as far as some of those ones do, but I try to incorporate some of the elements in it that reflect the clients that I work for when I'm doing resume writing services. So for you, it's a matter of going through and looking at it and saying, yeah, I really like that style, or I really like the way that that is. Like this would be one that I would like. I like the edginess of the border. I love the colors because I'm definitely a blues kind of person. So, I always feel like you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And even for somebody like me who does resumes all the time, this can be a really easy way to find resumes. Here's simple ones, and it gives you ideas. It doesn't mean that's the way you have to do it, but it just gives you ideas about how you might want to lay it out. And sometimes the laying it out is more trouble than it's worth. There's certainly been times where I've tried to emulate something like this and it's like, oh my goodness, this is, I could spend hours trying to get the circle and now that's actually really simple. That wouldn't take me hours because that's just um, a rectangle and then a circle superimposed over on top of it with the same exact same color. So that would actually be an easy thing to do. But I think, just take a look through and see what resonates with you. And then again, trying to balance it with what the company wants. So if you're applying to an ultra conservative company with this, that's not going to work. If you're applying to Google with something like this, or especially Google Analytics with something like this, that would probably work out really well. So it's trying to balance your personality with the personality of the company and trying to marry those two up, which I know sounds like it can be really challenging, but it also can be really fun. Having said that, always remember, if you're going to be doing an applicant tracking system, none of this kind of creative stuff will work at all. You'll lose all your formatting and you'll spend hours of work for really no purpose at all. So hopefully that helps you a little bit about how to think about your creating sort of a brand with your resume and keeping it true to who you are, but also then helping to sort of just pull in some of the elements of the companies as well. I feel like that was a bit of a whirlwind for you and a lot to take in, I know. Normally I teach a full day course on resume writing, so to try and condense it into an hour is really challenging. And hopefully I've given you sort of snippets of things that you can use and apply to your resume. And as always, if you have any questions or you need any help, just give me a shout. I'm always here for you. All right, thanks. Take care.